It started with a tiny bug on my fishing bag, a bug that would change my life forever. Fishing has always been my escape, a chance to breathe away from the hustle and bustle of life. Every month, I'd pack my gear and head out to the lake with my buddy, Matt. We'd cast lines into the still water under the moonlight, sharing stories and beers until the early hours of the morning. It wasn't just a hobby, it was a ritual, a piece of me. One evening, as I was unpacking after a trip, I noticed something strange on my fishing bag, a tiny, circular device stuck near the zipper. At first, I thought it was some kind of prank from Matt, but when I peeled it off and examined it closer, my stomach sank. It was a GPS tracker. I couldn't shake the unease. Why would someone track me? I decided to confront the one person who could answer, my wife, Kelly. Later that night, as she stirred a pot of pasta in the kitchen, I casually held up the tracker. "Hey, Kelly, do you know what this is?" She glanced at it, her face freezing for just a split second before she covered with a laugh. "No idea." "What is it?" "It's a GPS tracker." "I found it on my fishing bag," I said, my voice steady but probing. "Any idea how it got there?" Her laughter became awkward. "That's ridiculous." "I have no clue, maybe Matt put it there as a joke." Her dismissal didn't sit right with me, but I nodded, letting it slide for the moment. Still, her quick reaction planted the first seeds of suspicion in my mind. Why would she care about where I went fishing? That night, while Kelly slept soundly beside me, I couldn't stop replaying the moment. The way her lips twitched when I mentioned the tracker. The faint flicker of unease in her eyes. Something wasn't adding up. And I was going to find out what it was. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Kelly acted normal, or maybe a little too normal. She was chatty, affectionate even, but I noticed subtle differences in her behavior. She started asking more about my fishing trips. How long would I be gone? Would Matt and I stick to the same spot? It felt like she was digging for details, and every question made my skin prickle with unease. The tracker bugged me, literally and figuratively. I wasn't ready to accuse Kelly of anything, but I needed answers. Late one night, after Kelly had gone to bed, I pulled out my laptop and started researching GPS trackers. Turns out, they aren't cheap. Whoever bought it had to know what they were doing. I grabbed the device and looked for any markings or serial numbers. There it was, a brand name. After a quick search, I discovered that the tracker could be linked to a mobile app. My pulse quickened. Was it possible that Kelly was tracking me? The next morning, I decided to test her. I told Kelly that Matt and I were thinking of trying out a new spot on the other side of the lake. Her reaction was subtle, but I caught it, a flicker of hesitation before she smiled. "That sounds nice," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Nice?" That was it. Normally, she'd tease me about being predictable, about how we never changed our routine. Her indifference only deepened my doubts. Later that week, I took matters into my own hands. I placed the tracker in the glove compartment of my truck, hoping to learn more. When I got back from running errands, I checked it, and it had been moved. Not by me. That night, I confronted Kelly again. "So, you really don't know anything about this tracker?" I asked, holding it up for emphasis. Her face went pale this time, but she quickly recovered. "Why are you so fixated on this?" "I told you, I don't know where it came from." Her response was sharp, defensive even, and that's when I knew. She was lying. The following week, I decided to play along, acting as if nothing was wrong. If Kelly had secrets, I'd let her think I was oblivious while I quietly worked to uncover the truth. I waited for my monthly fishing trip to arrive. As usual, I packed my gear the night before and made a show of checking my rods and tackle box. "I'll be back by morning," I told Kelly over dinner. She nodded absently, but I noticed how her gaze lingered on me, almost as if she was studying me. That night, something unusual happened. I heard her phone vibrate repeatedly on the nightstand. Kelly was a light sleeper, but she didn't stir. Curious, I leaned over, careful not to wake her, and glanced at the screen. A message flashed across the lock screen: "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Same time." My chest tightened. I couldn't see who it was from, but the tone was unmistakable. I fought the urge to grab the phone and wake her up. Instead, I memorized the number. The next day, as planned, I headed out for my fishing trip. Or at least, that's what Kelly thought. After driving out of sight, I doubled back and parked a few blocks away from home. Then I waited, my heart pounding, 1,000 scenarios racing through my mind. It didn't take long. About an hour later, a black sedan pulled up to our house. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, carrying a duffel bag. I watched as Kelly greeted him at the door with a smile I hadn't seen in months. They disappeared inside, and the curtains closed. I sat there in stunned silence, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My heart was screaming at me to burst through the door, but my head told me to wait. I needed proof. If Kelly was betraying me, I wanted her lies to unravel completely. I drove off, my stomach churning, and returned hours later, just as the black sedan pulled away. Kelly was back to her usual self when I walked in, asking how the trip went. I played my part, smiling and telling her Matt had caught a big one. But inside, I felt sick. That night, I tossed and turned, replaying the moment in my head. The man. The bag. Her smile. I knew I couldn't confront her without more evidence. So, I decided to dig deeper. After that day, nothing felt real anymore. Every word Kelly said, every smile she gave, felt rehearsed, like she was playing a role in some twisted play. I kept my composure, acting like the same old husband she thought she could fool. But inside, I was unraveling. I decided I needed something concrete, irrefutable proof. The tracker, the text message, the man, they were pieces of a puzzle that wasn't fully formed yet. If I wanted the truth, I had to collect the missing pieces. The first thing I did was install a small camera in the living room, discreetly tucked into the corner bookshelf. It would give me a clear view of who came in and out of the house. I also rummaged through Kelly's phone records, which I'd accessed through our shared mobile plan. That number, the one from the mysterious text, kept popping up, usually during my fishing trips. Then came the most chilling discovery. While searching the bedroom for more clues, I opened the closet and noticed something unusual: men's clothing. A pair of boxers and a t-shirt, stuffed at the back behind her winter coats. I pulled them out, my hands trembling. They weren't mine. I stared at the garments for what felt like an eternity, bile rising in my throat. Someone had been here, in my home. This wasn't just a fling in some motel. She had brought him here, into our bed. Still, I kept my emotions in check. Losing my temper wouldn't help. I tucked the clothes back where I found them and left the room. The camera was my best bet. If she thought I was going on another fishing trip soon, maybe I could catch her red-handed. I just needed one more night. That weekend, I told Kelly I'd be heading out with Matt again. She smiled warmly. "Have fun," she said, handing me a packed lunch like the perfect wife. I drove away, parking in my usual hiding spot a few blocks down. Then, I watched. Sure enough, less than an hour later, the black sedan pulled up again. This time, I hit record on my phone as the man walked inside. When I finally replayed the footage from the living room camera later that night, my worst fears were confirmed. Kelly greeted him with a kiss, a deep kiss. They laughed as they made their way upstairs, leaving the living room empty. I could feel my blood boiling, but I forced myself to watch. They were in my home, on my couch, laughing as if I didn't exist. It was all on tape. Now I had what I needed. Proof. The question was, what would I do with it? I couldn't sleep that night. My mind was spinning with anger, pain, and a deep sense of betrayal. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together in my house, on my couch, laughing like they owned the place. By morning, my anger had solidified into resolve. I needed to confront her, but not yet. I wanted her lies to crumble piece by piece, and for that, I needed more. The following week, I carefully planned my next steps. I transferred the camera footage and all the evidence I had onto a secure hard drive. The video, the phone records, even pictures of the clothing I'd found, it was all there. I also placed a second camera in the bedroom. If they were bold enough to take things upstairs, I'd catch that too. That Friday, I told Kelly I'd be fishing again. This time, I planned to leave later than usual, giving her enough time to think I was gone but not enough to relax into her deception. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw her standing at the kitchen window, watching me leave with that same warm smile. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, forcing myself to smile back. I parked down the street, waiting. My heart pounded in my chest as I checked my watch, counting the minutes. It wasn't long before the black sedan appeared again, right on cue. The man stepped out, casually carrying his duffel bag. This time, I followed him inside on the hidden camera. I couldn't believe what I was watching. The man flopped onto my couch like it was his own, and Kelly sat beside him, curling into his arms. They talked and laughed for a while before heading upstairs. I clenched my jaw as they disappeared from the frame, leaving the house eerily quiet. I fast-forwarded the footage to later that evening when they came back downstairs. Kelly handed him a drink, and they talked for a while before he kissed her goodbye and left. It was surreal, watching my wife, the woman I thought I knew, play house with another man while I sat in my truck just blocks away. That was it. I had everything I needed. The next morning, I waited for Kelly to leave for her Saturday yoga class. As soon as she was gone, I went upstairs to our bedroom. I tore through every drawer, every closet, looking for more proof. And then, tucked inside her bedside table, I found something that made my stomach churn, an open box of condoms. We hadn't used protection in years, ever since I got a vasectomy after our second child. I placed everything back exactly as I'd found it and sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. This wasn't just a fling. She'd planned this. She'd built this second life. When Kelly returned, I pretended everything was fine, but inside, I was seething. That night, I barely spoke to her. I couldn't even look at her without imagining the betrayal I'd uncovered. Still, I held my tongue. I needed one last piece to complete the puzzle, a direct confrontation. The time had come. I couldn't keep living under the same roof with someone who had lied to me so deeply. The next Friday, after one final fishing trip, I decided to confront her with everything. When I walked into the house, Kelly was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up with a smile. "You're back early. How was the trip?" I dropped my bag by the door and stared at her, letting the silence stretch until her smile faltered. "It was enlightening," I said, my voice low. Her brow furrowed, but she tried to laugh it off. "What's that supposed to mean?" I walked over to the TV, plugged in the USB drive containing all the footage, and turned it on. "It means I know, Kelly. About him. About everything." Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" With a few clicks, the living room camera footage started playing. There she was, laughing with her lover on our couch, their faces unmistakable. I crossed my arms and waited as her gaze shifted from the screen to me, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find the words. "Is this clear enough for you?" I asked, my voice ice cold. "Wait, I can explain," she stammered, her voice shaking. "Explain?" I snapped, taking a step closer. "Explain what?" "That you've been bringing him here. That you've been sleeping with him in my house. In our bed. My voice cracked with anger, my hands trembling at my sides. Go ahead, Kelly. I'm dying to hear your explanation. She covered her face with her hands, but I wasn't going to let her hide. Look at me. I demanded. Be honest, for once in your life. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, I didn't mean for it to happen. I let out a bitter laugh. Didn't mean for it to happen. That's your excuse. Kelly, this wasn't a one-time mistake. This was planned. You were tracking me, for God's sake. Me. The one who's been faithful to you for 12 years. She looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. I thought you were cheating on me, she said softly. That's why I put the tracker on your bag. I thought you and Matt were hiding something from me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So let me get this straight, you thought I was cheating, so you decided to sleep with someone else. You invited him into our home. My voice was almost a roar now, my frustration boiling over. I didn't plan for it to go this far, she sobbed. I was lonely. You're always away, and I cut her off. Stop. Just stop. Don't you dare put this on me. The room fell silent except for her sobbing. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest, feeling a mix of fury and heartbreak. This wasn't the woman I thought I'd married. I'd trusted her, built a life with her, and she'd shattered it. You brought this on yourself, I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. And now you're going to face the consequences. Her head shot up. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice trembling with fear. You'll find out, I said, grabbing my bag and walking toward the door. Enjoy your time while it lasts, Kelly. Because everything you thought you had, it's over. I left her sitting there, broken and sobbing, but I didn't feel an ounce of pity. The next step was dealing with her lover. Leaving Kelly sobbing on the couch didn't bring me peace, it only fueled my anger. There was one more person who needed to answer for this betrayal, her lover. He'd waltzed into my home, acted like he belonged there, and violated everything I held sacred. The next day, I used the information I'd gathered about him to find out where he lived. He wasn't some faceless stranger anymore, his name was Jake, and I tracked down his address. If he thought he could walk away from this unscathed, he was dead wrong. I parked a few houses down and sat in my truck for a while, watching. His place was modest, a single-story house with an overgrown yard. It didn't fit the man I'd seen strutting around like he owned the world. Finally, I stepped out, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to do, but I knew I needed to confront him. My fists clenched at my sides as I walked up to his front door and rang the bell. It took a moment before the door opened, and there he was, Jake. He was taller than I remembered from the camera footage, his confident smirk faltering when he saw me standing there. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone cautious. "You know exactly why I'm here," I said, stepping forward. "I'm Kelly's husband." His eyes widened briefly before he masked his surprise with a calm demeanor. "Look, man, I don't know what you think." "Don't," I growled, cutting him off. "Don't you dare insult my intelligence. I've got all the proof I need, videos, messages, everything. You've been sleeping with my wife." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck, and for a moment, he looked almost embarrassed. "It's not what you think," he started. "Not what I think?" I shouted, my voice echoing down the quiet street. "You've been sneaking around behind my back, coming into my house, lying in my bed, and it's not what I think. Enlighten me, Jake. What exactly is it, then?" He raised his hands defensively. "Look, I didn't mean for this to get messy. Kelly said you two were having problems, and I stepped closer, my fists trembling. "Shut up. Just shut up. You don't get to justify this." For a moment, I thought he might fight back, but he took a step back instead. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice low. I want you out of my life. Out of my house. Out of my wife's life. And if you ever come near her, or me, again, I swear, you'll regret it. He swallowed hard, his cocky demeanor crumbling under my rage. Fine. I'll stay away. I didn't mean for this to happen, okay? I'm sorry. Sorry. I barked, laughing bitterly. You think sorry fixes this? I didn't wait for his response. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in his doorway, pale and shaken. He wasn't worth any more of my energy. Back in my truck, my hands were still trembling, but there was a small sense of relief. One confrontation down. But this wasn't over, not by a long shot. When I got home, Kelly was waiting for me in the living room. Her eyes were puffy, her face pale. Where were you? She asked quietly. I went to see him, I said bluntly. Her face crumbled. Oh my God. What did you do? Nothing, yet, I said coldly, walking past her. But don't worry, Kelly. The fun's just getting started. Kelly didn't say much after I told her I'd confronted Jake. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands fidgeting in her lap. I could tell she wanted to ask more, but I wasn't in the mood to give her any answers. Later that evening, as I stood in the kitchen pouring myself a glass of water, she finally broke the silence. Are you going to leave me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I stared at her for a moment, letting the weight of her question sink in. What I do next depends on you, I said evenly. She looked confused. What do you mean? I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. I mean, this isn't just about what you've done to me. It's about the kids, the house, everything we've built together. If you want to salvage any of it, you'll tell me the whole truth right now, no more lies. Tears filled her eyes, but I stayed silent, waiting. Finally, she nodded, wiping her face. Okay, she said, her voice trembling. I'll tell you everything. And she did. For the next hour, Kelly poured out a story of loneliness, suspicion, and bad decisions. She admitted to tracking me because she thought I was the one cheating. She confessed that she'd started seeing Jake months ago, thinking it was harmless at first. And she told me she'd let it spiral into something much bigger than she ever intended. I wasn't trying to ruin us, she said, sobbing into her hands. I was just lost. I listened quietly, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. When she finished, I set my glass down and spoke slowly. Lost doesn't excuse what you've done. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed our family. And now, you're going to face the consequences. She looked up at me, panicked. What do you mean? What are you going to do? You'll find out soon enough, I said, walking away. The next day, I started putting my plan into motion. Kelly had made her choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. But I wasn't going to act on impulse, I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done. First, I met with a lawyer. I laid out everything, the videos, the tracker, the phone records. He told me that while infidelity wouldn't change how assets were divided in the divorce, having proof of her betrayal could work in my favor if custody of the kids became a battle. That was all I needed to hear. Next, I contacted Jake directly. I'd let him off easy during our first confrontation, but now I wanted to hit him where it hurt. I hope you're ready, I told him over the phone. Because I've got footage of you and Kelly, and I'm not afraid to use it. Look, man, I'm sorry, he stammered, his tone completely different from the smug attitude he'd had before. Save it, I said coldly. You've already ruined enough. Just know this, I'm sending everything I have to Kelly's family. Her parents. Her friends. Everyone. Let's see how they feel about you after that. He tried to argue, but I hung up before he could finish. The thought of exposing them brought me no joy, but it felt like the only way to make them understand the depth of their betrayal. At home, Kelly noticed something was different. I wasn't yelling, wasn't arguing. I barely spoke to her, and when I did, my words were short and clipped. I could see the tension building in her, but I didn't care. That night, as we sat in the living room after putting the kids to bed, she finally broke the silence. "What are you planning, Mark?" she asked, her voice shaking. I looked at her calmly. "You'll see soon enough." Her face crumpled. "Please, don't do anything drastic. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I stood up, shaking my head. "You can't make this right, Kelly. You've already made your choices. Now it's time for me to make mine." With that, I walked upstairs, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The next morning, I woke early, my mind laser-focused on the task ahead. I made breakfast for the kids, kissed them goodbye as they left for school, and waited for Kelly to come downstairs. She looked like she hadn't slept, her eyes were puffy, and her shoulders slumped with the weight of what was coming. "Mark, can we talk?" she asked quietly. "Not now," I said coldly. "I have something to take care of." She didn't push me, but I could see the panic in her eyes. She could sense it, the end was near. That afternoon, I put my plan into action. I'd already arranged for her parents to come over, and I made sure they would arrive just before she got home from running errands. As expected, they were confused about why I'd called them so urgently. "What's going on, Mark?" her dad asked as they sat in the living room. "You'll see," I said simply. When Kelly walked through the door and saw her parents sitting there, her face turned ghostly pale. "Mom? Dad? What are you doing here?" I stepped forward, holding a small folder in my hands. "They're here because they deserve to know the truth, Kelly. About who you've become." Her eyes darted to the folder, and I saw the panic flicker across her face. "Mark, don't." Ignoring her plea, I handed the folder to her father. "It's all in here," I said. "The tracker. The phone records. The videos. Everything she's been hiding from you, and from me." Her father opened the folder and began flipping through the evidence, his expression darkening with every page. Her mother gasped when she saw one of the still images from the video footage. "Kelly, how could you do this?" her father demanded, his voice trembling with anger. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to explain. "It wasn't like that. I didn't mean for it to happen." "Stop lying," I interrupted. "You had plenty of chances to stop this, but you didn't. You chose to betray me, to bring another man into our home." Her parents looked at her in utter disbelief, and I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. She couldn't run from the truth anymore. But I wasn't done. "Here's how this is going to go," I said, my voice steady. "You're going to move out of this house. I've already filed for divorce, and you'll be served soon enough. You'll get visitation rights with the kids, but they're staying with me. And if you fight me on this, I'll make sure every single person in your life knows exactly what you've done." She broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. "Mark, please. Don't take the kids away from me. They're my whole world. Were they your world when you brought Jake into this house? When you were upstairs with him while they were sleeping down the hall?" I shot back. She had no answer for that, only more tears. Her father stood up, his voice cold and sharp. "You should leave now, Kelly. You've done enough damage for one lifetime." She looked at me one last time, desperation written all over her face. But I didn't waver. I turned and walked away, leaving her to face her parents' judgment. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork and meetings with my lawyer. Kelly moved out within a week, and I kept my promise to secure custody of the kids. The house was quieter without her, but it felt peaceful. As for Jake, I sent him a final message with a simple warning: "Stay away, or you'll regret it." He never replied, and I never heard from him again. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was a new start. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe again.